Imagine stepping onto the stage of a massive auditorium in São Paulo. The lights are blinding, the audience is totally hushed, and you've spent, countless hours perfecting your grand jeté.
Right, but the truth is, the real performance didn't actually start in the studio.
No, it started hours ago, right on your plate. I mean, the food you ate wasn't just fuel.
Exactly. It was a complex, microscopic code of instructions that dictates your stamina, your focus, and your physical resilience.
And it's a total shift in perspective.
Yeah.
We are so culturally conditioned to view diet as a chore or like a restriction.
Instead of the literal architecture of our biological capabilities, understanding that architecture means moving past surface-level assumptions and really engaging with the science of how we live and move.
Which, funny enough, is precisely the mindset required for mastering a new language. So welcome to Acad FM, an exclusive broadcast created by Academia BSB.
It is Wednesday, March 18th, 2026.
And our mission today is to analyze and review the latest class notes from March 16th. These are custom-tailored for our VIP student. So, Mireilly, this one is for you.
Yeah, you're an 18-year-old vegetarian, an actress, and a ballerina from the Brazilian Midwest.
Mato Grosso do Sul, to be exact. And you are gearing up for a massive life change moving to the Brazilian Big Apple, São Paulo, to start your freshman year in journalism at the prestigious public university, USP.
That transition from the Midwest to a sprawling metropolis like São Paulo really mirrors your linguistic journey in our English conversations course. You are currently tackling the CEFRL B1 level.
Which is a tough plateau to break through.
It is, because to conquer B1, you have to leave behind the comfort of basic, memorized survival phrases. A journalist doesn't just ask where the bathroom is, right?
Right. A journalist navigates complex, abstract concepts, things like the nuances of dietary science, public policy, and the psychology of trends, which just so happen to be the core themes of your recent classes.
Exactly. Today, we are unpacking the microscopic mechanics of your food and how mastering those concepts is exactly like mastering English at this intermediate level.
But before we dive into the deep end of the vocabulary, we actually need to talk about behavioral economics. Specifically, your gamification rewards.
Ah, yes. The Academia BSB platform just updated.
And the stars one today is 42.
Which is a highly strategic number. I mean, our platform's estrelinas, our stars, aren't just virtual pats on the back. They are a psychological tool.
Yeah, they're designed to incentivize consistent daily habits. For an incoming university student managing a chaotic schedule, resource management is everything.
And those stars accumulate into tangible rewards. Top-ranking students can enter monthly giveaways of books and school merchandise.
You currently have a balance of around 300 to 400 stars, and I know you've got your eye on that new sticker book, which costs 1,000.
Yep.
So these 42 points are a really solid return on your intellectual investment.
They really are. So to celebrate that, and, well, as a vocal warm-up for our resident actress, I challenge you to summarize the underlying theme of your recent lessons using a tongue twister.
Oh, wow. A tongue twister built from the current vocabulary. Let's hear it.
Here is the phonetic hurdle. A sweeping fad of fancy flour forms a flexible gluten scaffolding.
Okay, that is a mouthful, but it perfectly maps out the linguistic territory we need to cover today.
It does. Let's pull apart that sentence. Let's start with the difference between a fad and something that is sweeping.
Well, a fad always strikes me as something highly visible but structurally hollow, like a fidget spinner.
Right, exactly. It dominates the cultural conversation for maybe 3 months and then totally vanishes without a trace.
But contrast that with a trend that is sweeping.
Think about the physical action of sweeping a floor with a broom. It means you are slowly but comprehensively covering every single inch of a space.
Yeah, so a sweeping technological change like the smartphone doesn't vanish. It alters the landscape permanently.
Absolutely. And the final piece of that tongue twister is scaffolding.
Now, when I first see that word, my brain immediately goes to construction sites, like the temporary metal pipes holding up a brick wall.
Sure, but your notes apply this to baking and biology, because the core concept of a scaffolding is a hidden support matrix.
Oh, right, like an omnipresent framework. A building relies on steel scaffolding, but your body relies on a scaffolding of proteins and bones.
Exactly. And understanding how a word transitions from a literal construction term to a biological metaphor is a huge hallmark of B1 comprehension.
It really is. And speaking of biological metaphors, I was fascinated by your class discussion regarding the terms white collar and blue collar.
That was a great discussion. Traditionally, white collar means office jobs where you wear a button-down shirt.
And blue collar means manual, physical labor, like factory or farm work. But you brought up this brilliant theory about longevity.
Yeah, you suggested people live longer today because our economy is increasingly white collar, saving our bodies from the extreme wear and tear of that manual work.
It's such a sharp observation.
Yeah.
And it highlights a really fascinating evolutionary paradox. For millennia, humans engaged in blue-collar survival. Our bodies literally evolved to withstand constant movement.
But now the modern economy demands we sit at white-collar desks for 8 hours a day.
So we actually have to artificially simulate that ancestral labor by going to the gym.
Or, in your case, attending rigorous ballet classes, just to keep our biological scaffolding from deteriorating.
It's so ironic. We pay a gym to do the physical labor our ancestors were paid to do.
It really is. Now, shifting from the modern economy to the traits of a good journalist, your past class exercises required distinguishing between pairs of complex words.
Right. Words like righteously versus wrongly, and empathetic versus ambitious.
These aren't just vocabulary words, though. They are philosophical distinctions. Wrongly simply implies an error in fact or justice.
But righteously, that carries the weight of moral justification. It's acting with the absolute certainty that you are ethically correct.
Exactly. And for a journalist, you need a balance of the next two words. You need to be ambitious-driven to chase down the hard truths.
But you absolutely must remain empathetic. If you can't deeply understand the feelings of the people you're interviewing, your reporting will just be totally hollow.
That level of nuance on the page is crucial, but it has to be matched by precision in your speech.
Oh, for sure. Let's pause our conceptual analysis for a moment and look at the physical mechanics of pronunciation. Because your notes highlighted some serious phonetic hurdles.
This is where muscle memory completely fights against a Brazilian student's brain. Take the words candy and candle.
They look almost identical on paper. But the vowel placement happens in entirely different zip codes inside your mouth.
Right, it comes down to the ending consonants. When you say candle, you have to create a dark L sound. Your tongue drops down and back into your throat.
But candy requires a bright forward E sound. Your tongue pushes right up behind your front teeth.
Another tricky pair from your past notes. Law versus low.
Oh, that's a classic. Law requires dropping the jaw wide open, while low rounds the lips forward.
Exactly. And then we have the ultimate battleground for Portuguese speakers in the current class notes. Habits versus rabbits.
I've seen students stare at these words and completely freeze because the letters just betray them.
The visual interference is profound. In Portuguese, an R at the beginning of a word, like redo, triggers a sound produced with friction at the back of the throat.
Which sounds exactly like an English H.
Right, but in English, habits requires unobstructed breathy air from the chest. To say rabbits, you have to physically round your lips and engage a hard R.
You are literally training new muscles, very much like training a specific muscle group for contemporary dance.
You also have to train your mouth for the buzzing Z sound. The word news, which you'll be using constantly at USP, requires pulling the corners of your lips back to vibrate that S into a Z.
It is completely different from the soft, open shape of the word new. News versus new.
The same physical precision applies to the word examine.
Oh, the trap here is placing the stress on the first syllable, right? Or ending with a long E.
Exactly. The rhythmic stress falls heavily on the second syllable, examine, and it finishes with a very short, clipped E sound.
Those are tricky. But your teacher spent a significant amount of time on what we call the danger words. These are the false similarities that can entirely derail a conversation.
The most notorious one being soccer.
Yes. Because of the double C, many Brazilian students visually interpret the word and pronounce it as saucer, like a flying saucer.
But phonetically, those C's form a hard, sharp K. It's soccer. Another classic trap is author, which often gets distorted into authority.
Which completely changes both the vowel sounds and the rhythmic stress of the word. So the takeaway here, Mireilly, is that as an incoming journalist, you cannot trust your eyes when reading English aloud.
No, you have to rely on active listening. You have to hear the mechanics of the language in the real world.
Which naturally leads us to how these words operate in the wild. Let's take a quick mental breath and look at 3 contextual phrases from your notes. Dietary restriction, to get wind of a trend, and fooling around.
I am obsessed with the imagery of getting wind of a trend. It implies a trend is like a weather system. You feel the breeze of it before the storm actually hits.
To see how these function, let's step into a quick role play. Let's imagine I am a highly pretentious baker in São Paulo who just opened a new shop, and you are a very skeptical customer.
I can easily tap into my journalistic skepticism. Let's set the scene.
Welcome to my artisanal avant-garde bakery. I just got wind of a trend that is taking over Europe, so today our entire menu consists of bread made exclusively from pulverized tree bark and river water.
Tree bark. Are you just fooling around, or is that your actual business model?
I have a highly specific dietary restriction,
Yeah.
and I need to know if river water aligns with my nutritional macros.
It's all about the earthly minerals.
And seen. See, by putting those phrases into a scenario, you move them from abstract vocabulary into practical, communicative tools.
And that skepticism you just channeled in our fake bakery is exactly the critical lens we need for the heavy reading comprehension in your class.
Right, because we are looking at the often blurry line between a cultural dietary lifestyle and a strict medical necessity. The first text analyzes the phenomenon of gluten-free baking. Now, if we look at this through a cultural lens, the gluten-free movement looks exactly like the sweeping fad we defined earlier. Millions of people with no actual medical issues abruptly stopped eating wheat because it became culturally fashionable.
They associated dropping a specific protein with this abstract idea of wellness. But the text brilliantly contrasts that cultural fad with the underlying chemistry.
Because for individuals with celiac disease, removing gluten isn't a lifestyle choice. It is an absolute biological imperative to prevent their immune system from attacking their own intestines.
And the text goes further, explaining what gluten actually is mechanically. When you mix wheat flour with water, two proteins, glutenin and gliadin, bind together to form gluten.
And that gluten is the scaffolding. It creates a stretchy, elastic web. When you add yeast to bread, the yeast releases carbon dioxide gas. Gluten web catches those gas bubbles like a balloon, which is why a loaf of bread rises and gets fluffy.
Precisely. So if a baker simply removes wheat and substitutes it with rice flour to meet a dietary restriction, there is no scaffolding.
The gas just escapes, and the bread collapses into a dense brick.
The science of gluten-free baking requires introducing entirely new chemical binders, like xanthan gum, to artificially replicate that lost protein matrix.
It is literal structural engineering disguised as cooking. Now, applying that same rigorous scientific evaluation to an even more consequential topic, your class analyzed the intersection of public health and medical misinformation.
This is a heavy one. The reading material thoroughly documented the historical controversy initiated in 1998 by Andrew Wakefield. He published a paper in the highly respected medical journal, The Lancet, suggesting a potential link between the MMR vaccine, which protects against measles, mumps, and rubella and autism spectrum disorders.
Now, maintaining strict journalistic impartiality, the text outlines the sequence of events. The study was based on the claims of a small group of parents who reported noticing subtle behavioral changes in their children shortly after the vaccination was administered.
However, the text also details the subsequent response from the global medical community. The core tenet of the scientific method is replication, right?
Right. And researchers worldwide attempted to replicate Wakefield's findings across massive populations.
And they found absolutely no link between the vaccine and autism. Furthermore, investigations revealed severe methodological flaws and massive conflicts of interest in Wakefield's original study, leading The Lancet to fully retract the paper.
The rise in autism diagnoses is widely attributed by the medical consensus to broadened diagnostic criteria and vastly improved psychiatric awareness.
But despite the retraction, the psychological damage was done. The media amplified the fear, vaccination rates plummeted in certain demographics, and we saw a completely preventable resurgence of diseases like measles.
Which leads to a vital question for a future journalist.
Oh.
Why does a retracted rumor outlive the scientific data?
You actually addressed this during your class debate on public policy. Your instinct was very optimistic. You argued that we need to actively share good news about science to drown out the fear.
I love that. But your teacher offered a more systemic counterpoint, suggesting that the only long-term defense is heavily funding early education to instill critical thinking skills from a young age.
Both are essential. You need the critical thinking skills to evaluate the data and the communication skills to share the truth effectively.
Let's take another conversational reset here, because we are moving from reading about health to actually listening to how these concepts are discussed in real time.
We are analyzing a listening exercise featuring Alex Morgan, the superstar of the U.S. women's national soccer team. She famously credits a significant portion of her athletic endurance to adopting a strict vegan diet.
But the audio exercise makes a fascinating distinction. It features Dr. Tanya Halliday, a researcher from the University of Utah, who clarifies that this isn't a magic nutritional bullet.
No, it's not. Dr. Halliday states explicitly that, according to current sports science research, a vegan diet does not inherently improve athletic performance when compared to a well-balanced omnivorous diet.
But the crucial finding is that it doesn't decrease performance either.
The catch is the logistics. If an elite athlete simply removes animal products without a strategy, their biological scaffolding will collapse.
The audio emphasizes the necessity of meticulous planning. A vegan athlete has to calculate their exact intake of plant-based proteins, complex carbohydrates, and essential fats to support the extreme caloric burn of professional sports.
It almost always requires the oversight of a board-certified sports dietitian. But, the content of the audio is important, but for a B1 student, the medium is the message.
What do you mean by that?
Well, why is your teacher having you listen to an American sports broadcast and a university researcher instead of a scripted textbook CD?
Because textbook audio is sterilized. It is recorded in a soundproof booth by actors speaking at half speed. If you are going to USP, you need to hear how an adrenaline-fueled sports commentator actually pronounces the word soccer over the roar of a stadium.
Exactly. You need to hear the natural cadence and advanced vocabulary of a scientist explaining kinesiology, the mechanics of human movement, in a live interview.
Real-world listening forces your brain to adapt to unpredictable pacing, regional accents, and the natural hesitations of unscripted English. It builds cognitive resilience.
And building resilience brings us perfectly to your own life, Mireilly. Let's review your writing workshop exercise. The prompt was to write an article titled Fueling Strength, the Vegetarian Lifestyle for Active Women.
Before we even look at the grammar, we have to acknowledge your schedule, which was detailed in the text. You are juggling ballet on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays for an hour and a half.
Plus contemporary dance on Mondays and Wednesdays for an hour.
What impressed me wasn't just the volume of activity, but your energy management. You specifically noted your preference for taking your Friday ballet class at 4 p.m.
You recognize that scheduling a highly physical class late on a Friday night after a full week of academic and physical strain leads to diminishing returns. That is elite-level self-awareness.
You channeled that awareness into your essay drafts, too. But looking at your teacher's feedback for the second draft, we see a crucial pivot required for B1 proficiency. The teacher noted that you need to incorporate conditional sentences.
Let's look at this through an editor's eyes. At an A2 level, a student might write a basic factual statement. Vegetables give a dancer energy.
It is grammatically correct, but journalistically it is kind of flat. It lacks narrative momentum.
Right. A conditional sentence introduces causality. It creates a narrative of cause and effect. Instead of a flat statement, the B1 structure demands something like, if a dancer meticulously plans her plant-based diet, she will unlock the necessary stamina to survive a 3-hour rehearsal.
Or conversely, if the diet lacks essential mineral binders, the athlete would experience immediate fatigue. It elevates the writing from a simple list of facts to a compelling argument fit for a wellness magazine.
And here's the immediate payoff. Your teacher noted that if you finalize this draft and polish those conditional structures, AcademiaBSB wants to publish it on the school's blog.
And doing so will flood your account with those estrelincias. Get those stars and secure that sticker book.
As we head toward the end of our deep dive today, let's zoom out and look at your overall performance review. Reaching the B1 plateau is often the most frustrating phase of language learning because the nature of the challenge fundamentally changes.
Yeah, at the beginner levels, your brain is just frantically searching for the right vocabulary word to survive an interaction.
But at B1, you already have the words. The challenge is cognitive endurance. It's the ability to maintain grammatical accuracy, monitor your pronunciation of danger words, and structure a logical argument all at the same time without a script.
It is the linguistic equivalent of a 3-hour ballet rehearsal, which is why we have a very lighthearted but highly professional reminder for you.
We know you are incredibly busy right now, spending hours hunting down video dance competitions online and organizing your move to São Paulo.
But the Academia BSB methodology is a system, and a system only works if you execute the reps. You still need to do your homework.
Your specific assignment is to pull up that Alex Morgan audio again, grab a physical highlighter, and mark every single word on the transcript where the native speaker's pronunciation drastically differs from your natural Brazilian instincts.
Think of it as prep work for your journalism degree. Attention to detail is everything. Every concept we've unpacked today, from the micromechanics of your tongue placement to the macro decisions of public health policy, is deeply interconnected.
To truly tie these massive themes together, the intersection of food, corporate responsibility, and public awareness, we need to look back at a defining moment in history.
We have to talk about Upton Sinclair and his landmark 1906 novel, The Jungle.
It is one of the most consequential pieces of literature of the 20th century. Sinclair was an investigative journalist at heart. He spent weeks undercover in the meatpacking plants of Chicago.
His primary goal was to expose the horrific, exploitative labor conditions and the crushing poverty faced by immigrant workers in the blue-collar industry. He wanted to spark a revolution in workers' rights.
But that is not what happened. The public largely ignored the plight of the workers. Instead, they were absolutely nauseated by Sinclair's vivid, graphic descriptions of the unsanitary conditions of the meat itself.
The tainted food supply they were feeding their families. The public outcry was so visceral and immediate that it forced the United States government to act, ultimately leading to the creation of the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA.
Sinclair famously lamented his accidental impact, saying, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach."
Wow. There is a remarkably poignant quote from the novel that echoes our discussions today about health and responsibility. He wrote, "There is no difference between a man who kills another with a knife and a man who kills him with a tainted food supply."
It is a stark reminder of the power of systems, which leaves us with the final provocative thought for you to carry into your week. When you sit down for a meal and you make a choice about your diet, whether you are eating gluten-free, vegan, or a traditional omnivorous plate, are you simply putting fuel into your biological tank?
Or are you making a structural statement about the kind of global supply chains, the kind of scientific literacy, and the kind of public policies you are willing to support?
Every meal is a vote for the future, just as every new word you master is a new tool to shape the world around you.
Mireilly, thank you for letting us dive into your world today. Keep pushing through that B1 plateau, crush that homework, and best of luck packing for the Big Apple of Brazil.
Keep up the phenomenal work.
And remember, as we always say here at Academia BSB,
It is not only about the language.
it is all about communication.